cynicism is definitely a form of cowardice. You are
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 28 of the Spotlight Podcast, Success Stories for Veterans, where it is our job to break down and analyze Titans from both the military and civilian communities to discover their tactics, their mindset, and their systems so that you can take those and apply them to your life and ultimately to your transition. Those Titans range from best-selling authors to former heads of state to other divergent thinkers who are out there dominating their field by challenging conventional wisdom. And today we're interviewing Glenn Cowan. Now, Glenn's time in the military was spent serving in Canada's National Mission Unit. And since leaving the military, Glenn, like many of us, bounced around a little bit before he decided to jump into venture capitalism. He now runs his own firm, 19 Investments, while simultaneously raising 2 daughters and working as a contributor and speaker for the Talent War Group. So how does Glenn do it? Listen and find out. Glenn, thank you for joining us.
Carson, it is a pleasure to connect with you.
So, Glenn, for people who aren't familiar with you and what do you do, give me the background, give me the elevator pitch.
So what I tell people right now is that I'm a special operations warrior pretending to be a venture capitalist. I'm running a venture fund called 19 Venture Partners. It's gone through multiple sort of maturations, but right now what I'm doing is predominantly looking at technology companies that that are innovated out of either a need or a problem identified in a special operations or national security intelligence sort of required mandate. That's a dual use ability to scale and not only solve that problem for sort of the folks downrange that are keeping us safe, but also scale from a dual use perspective with different commercial applications. So that's kind of where I've landed right now.
Well, that's a very interesting landing spot, and we'll jump into that. But let's go back for a second and walk me through, what you were doing in that first few years post-military. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, it looked a lot like false bravado, if I'm being honest. I started my company 19 Investments while I was still serving in the military. So I incorporated that in 2013. At the time, I was a squadron commander in a national mission unit. And I created that company really for my own sort of investment purposes and my own portfolio, not really knowing the vision of what I wanted it to do. And when I left the military, I retired in 2016. I retired medically after being injured on the job, but it was also the right time for me to move on from where I was. So it was kind of in a weird way, a blessing in disguise because it helped make the decision for me. I was a little bit timid of taking that next step for myself and really throwing all my eggs into the entrepreneurial sort of spirit. And so I kind of bounced around for about a year and a half, working in other jobs in sort of the security field and the tech innovation field, where I was still, receiving a good salary and doing stuff I liked with kind of the right team, or what I thought was the right team. But ultimately, I wasn't satisfied working to fulfill someone else's vision. And so that entrepreneurial bug really crept back in, and I really went in with both feet on 19.
So you mentioned false bravado. What was it about that transition space that you now look back on and say you had false bravado?
Well, I was convincing myself that transition was easy and that I was ready for it. And, I think for, most of my colleagues, whether in Canada or in the US, from coming out of the special operations units, but even the wider military community, transition is not easy. And, I was convincing myself that it was, and I was kind of convincing myself that I didn't miss the old life. And although I never looked back and questioned my decision because I knew it was the right time to move on, I also, in a weird way, didn't allow myself time to kind of grieve the old life.
Right.
And I haven't done that until kind of recently. So the first sort of year and a half to 2 years in transition, I was still, when I would see, friends of mine that were still serving and they'd ask me how it's going, I'm like, yeah, it's great. Everything's awesome. Even if it wasn't, if it was confusing or challenging, or felt like I was still kind of lost or figuring things out. It took me a while to be very open and vulnerable with my own sort of feelings on transition and sort of how I sort of arrived at where I am now. So that's where I think I say sort of that false bravado is I was convincing myself that, I was in a much better position than maybe I was.
Yeah. And it seems to me like that's not too uncommon, especially for, like you said, the broader military. But you also mentioned that you were being a little timid. What was going on there that was making you timid?
Well, it's tough to go out on your own.
Right.
And for any of your listeners that are entrepreneurial or have that bug, it's a big commitment. It's a lot. I equate my current investment thesis a lot to special operations planning principles. And it's very high risk, high reward in a lot of regards. And we were making, a great salary. We were, well covered, with every sort of plan you could imagine to kind of keep you and your family in a great spot. I went into jobs where I was, having comparable paychecks, and it was sort of that comfort level that I knew, I'm not an employee. Like I know, enough about me to know that, I need to execute and move on my own vision, but it took me a little while to really get the confidence, one, to recognize the fact that was in fact the correct journey for me, and also to kind of, double down on my own sort of thoughts and stop being a hypocrite, because I was, advising and talking to a lot of other people about, just go out on your own and you can do it. I mean, and then here I was kind of not doing it. And it took a while, and I think that's okay to take a while. One of the trends that I've seen sort of with transition is, the first thing you stumble on is probably not what you're going to end up really sinking your teeth in. And it might take a few evolutions of projects or jobs or, the next bound, whatever that may look like. The first thing you settle on is probably not going to be what sustains you into sort of the next phase of your life.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you were bouncing around. What was it that was like that crux moment where you're like this far and no farther? Now it's time to do it.
Yeah. It was very much an aha moment. And I had a eureka moment. And it was twofold. The first company that I was working for, I thought was going to be, an extension of a national mission unit in the private sector, gotcha. Doing some really cutting edge things. And what I found was the leadership was very similar to some of the leadership that I had experienced in my former life. And it was negative, and I didn't really want to pursue that anymore. And it also sort of led to a transition into another company that was a very innovative sort of technology, that's the word I'm looking for, like integrator. Okay. And that company took me to the Middle East. And it's funny because I was in Saudi Arabia doing some work, sort of integrating some technology into their special operations forces. And I went down to Abu Dhabi, and I ended up writing an email home. And it was while I was in Abu Dhabi, I kind of connect in with mom. I'm like, hey, how's it going? I'm in Abu, And she says to me, oh, you have a cousin in Abu Dhabi. And I was like, I didn't even know I had a cousin. So this is a guy on mom's side of the family. And she's like, yeah, I hear he has a big job. And I said, okay, sure. I'll write to my cousin who's, long lost cousin, and say, hey, anyway, we met up for dinner, and he has a huge job. He's running one of the sovereign wealth funds, for like one of Abu Dhabi's sovereign wealth funds, one of the big investment funds. We hit it off like gangbusters. He's like a brother that I didn't know I had. And he kind of sort of took a listen to my story, and he's like, dude, you've got He's like, you've got a killer investment fund here, and you've got the vehicle to do it. And you've got the tech, you've got the access to tech. You understand and sort of see the problem sets ahead of them, like for early stage sort of adoption of deal flow. And he's like, let's do this. And so he was really that kick in the ass I needed to kind of say, you know what, there's more to life than $100,000 paycheck. And double down and go it alone. And that's exactly what I've done. And it was the validation of a guy sort of in that, managing, tens of billions of dollars, to basically say, hey, you're onto something. Like it was that confidence check and that validation. And I haven't looked back since.
Gotcha. So he's looking at the market and he's saying, hey, this is something. What do you do when you get back from the Middle East? What did that look like?
Immediately into sort of fund development, really ironing out the thesis, putting the private placement memorandum together. The deal flow was easy, and the community was easy. It was, it started to become a little bit of a journey of, putting the structure behind the idea, mm-hmm. and then getting out and pounding the pavement. All this sort of corresponded around the same time that I hit a bit of a moonshot on one of my first investments. And I invested in a respirator company in December of 2018. And so, this is a company, it's a Canadian company that really makes the world's best sort of respirator for breathing clean air. And, the thesis was in that specific company, here's coming out of the top military units really globally with, pretty much open budgets to have the best equipment for our soldiers. And we didn't have a custom built respirator for the military market, sort of a half-mass particulate respirator. And so these guys approached me and said, we're building one. We're connected with, the right sort of still serving tier 1 special operators. We've got the right input. Let's build this company. Let's build this product and build this company. Are you interested to come in as an investor? And so I came in personally as a seed investor. And that was 2018. Who would have thought that 2020, we're in a global pandemic and every single person is wearing a mask and a respirator. And what that little bit of deal flow and that validation did was kind of take me and my idea of a thesis and saying, hey, there's indicators and warnings out there on early stage companies that, if you look at some of these problems through the lens of a special operator and what we know and what we need, we're going to see trends and indicators and warnings of, problems that need to be fixed. And we're going to see them years ahead of the rest of the world. And so people thought I was crazy for investing in a respirator company in Canada, where we have probably the world's, well, you're in Alaska, you got some pretty clean, clean air, but we've got incredibly clean air. And they're like, what are you doing buying this company? And I'm like, I didn't see a pandemic, but I'm like, you watch, we will be gravitating towards masks. Not maybe in this mass adoption, but certainly in niche verticals. And sure enough, that particular company provided a lot of validation for my thesis. And all of a sudden, these big institutional investors started to kind of take notice and say, I went from being, hey, you're a guy with a good idea. You got a cool story, a cool background. You're not pitching a Series A software SaaS based fund like everyone else. Yeah. And it provided some credibility and some track record that attracted a lot of attention. And I find that's sometimes just what it takes is a little bit of that hook to sort of take that good idea and sort of put a little meat on the bones, I guess.
Yeah. So you were able to take that one idea and then grow it. But when you're looking at and evaluating now, knowing what you know now from this whole process, as you said, credibility, what are warning signs to you when you're looking at a potential business deal versus what gets you excited?
The warnings. Okay. Great question. So I'm a very intuitive decision maker. And I think special operators are very intuitive decision makers. We are making very fast pace, high risk, high reward decisions. We trust our gut, and we're probably 90% of or maybe not 90. We probably have a good threshold for our decision quality information just on experience and intuition. And then we kind of will be able to sort of close that gap. And it's very much the same when I look at evaluating a company. So, with my thesis and my network that I'm still involved in, I'll be able to very quickly determine whether or not something is a widget or a good idea. Mm-hmm. Or maybe even just like a cool product that kind of briefs and pitches really well, but doesn't actually have client adoption. And whether or not it's going to be able to actually develop into a capability that can feed like a forced employment concept. And companies, even in the private sector, whether they know it or not, are onboarding technologies into forced employment concepts. And so I'm very, that's the sort of the first thing I look at is it a widget? Is it not worth the paper it's printed on, or is it just kind of some sexy piece of tech that's, might be cool, but it's going to end up sitting on your shelf? Or is it actually something that can integrate into a capability that can solve the problem? And then the very close second thing I look at is the founding team. And I know you and I were connected through Mike Sorelli at the Talent War. And that's exactly what Mike and his team at Echelon Front Overwatch and the whole Talent War are sort of really drawing out, is just how critical leadership, management, and founders are. And so that's a very close second, because investing in companies, investing in early stage companies is a lot like a marriage. And, you're getting in bed with these people that will become your partners, and you want to make sure that it's a good fit. There's solid leadership. There's, honesty and integrity, and then an ability to execute. And, I'm fortunate to have run multiple special operations selection processes. And I draw a lot of my experience in how I'm looking at founders. It's, I don't put them through the same process per se, but I'm using a lot of my experience from that process to be able to make determinations on someone's fit and function in a very short amount of time.
So when you're looking at, the leadership management, and I know a lot of veterans, especially professionally ambitious ones, whether they're going to be a founder or they're thinking about, hey, I'm going to jump into a startup, as a leadership component. When you're talking about integrity and all of that, how do you pull that apart so that you don't end up married to somebody that sold well,
yeah,
really sucks long term?
It's a lot of intuition, a lot of track record. I'm a big believer in character over experience as well in some regards. So in some regards, track record and experience is hugely important. But I'm also a big believer in the fact that we can train and we can arm people with the right professional development to have them succeed. So when I know that there's a character fit and an integrity fit, it really allows for that deeper discussion and deeper conversation. And it's I gauge it by asking a lot of questions about their vision for their company, and then pose scenarios to the founders, sort of in regards to sort of their approach to different scenarios that happen through a sort of the growth cycle and the scale of a business. And what I found to be one of the most important traits that I find I can kind of suss out very quickly is humility. And that really has to do with what I think is sort of a founder's dilemma as their company grows and scales. Because, this is probably not true across the board, but I think in a majority of cases, we're going to hit a point in time where the pace of growth of the company outstrips the founder. Mm-hmm. And they're going to have to make a very tough decision about what they do with their baby. It's kind of like letting your firstborn go,
Yeah.
There comes a point in time when the ecosystem of a company evolves to a point in time where mom or dad kind of has to like let it go a little bit. And I use scenarios that we walk through as part of like informal discussions of kind of getting to know each other. And I find in those discussions, I get a pretty good sense of, one, how they're going to get to some of those milestones and prove their ability to execute, but then also how they're going to deal with some of the tough questions when we get there.
And when you're seeing these founders, and I call it like the perpetuation paradox, it is that break moment. When you're determining, what that moment is for these founders, have you seen any trends in that besides just, humility that actually give you a good indication of whether or not they're going to be able to let that go?
Yeah, I find it's them being true to their vision. Most founders want to see their companies grow to as big or as influential or, hit some sort of a milestone that they've created in their head. Maybe that's revenue, maybe it's market penetration, maybe it's, access to a specific market. And inevitably to get there, you're going to onboard some other investors, some other talent, some other strategics to help sort of clear some of these hurdles. The founders that I would really want to back, I would say, are those that want to stay involved in the ride, even if it means relinquishing a little bit of control. And so it's a lot like, sort of from a military perspective, sort of preaching decentralized command to your subordinates, but then being able to become a subordinate of your own doing. And, the truly good leaders are also really good followers. And so it's that mix of sort of founder or visionary that could play both roles, both leader and follower, and continue to kind of help execute their vision, even if maybe we had to, maybe say replace them with a more professional CEO as an example. Because, you hit a threshold with complexity as you hit different milestones of fundraising that sometimes outpaces or outstrips either the skill set or the ability of that particular founder or CEO.
Gotcha. So
that kind of answer your question?
Yes, it does. That's very, very important, because I think the ability to fire yourself is very important, right?
Yeah, or arrive organically at the fact that maybe this particular role and that comes with it is not for you. And
Right.
More often than not, what's exciting about being a founder when you hit that stage also means your job's becoming less fun.
Yeah.
You're reporting to shareholders. You're maybe looking at more governance issues. You're dealing with lawyers. You're poring over, subscription documents on, subsequent investment rounds, as opposed to like being down at the coalface with your team, actually building out your products, services, or whatever your company is doing.
Yeah, exactly. So let's switch gears for a second, because what you're obviously very familiar with the business finance world and all of that. What are the differences in your eyes between business finance and personal finance?
Scope and scale, for sure. And often an ability to separate the two, I think would sort of, let me just try to think about how to articulate that. Personal finance, both require a certain set of discipline and rules that can be applied sort of the same way, a certain set of discipline and rules that if you follow and stick to your rules, you should be in a position where you'll do, pretty well in terms of managing personal or business finance. On the personal side, I think you have an advantage in time. And so if you use a military member as an example, regardless of rank or trade or branch of service they're in, for the most part, you can come in as a relatively young person and have a very pretty solid, guaranteed, not bad paycheck. Certainly from in the Canadian Armed Forces, I think we pay our people very well. And if you're a 20-something young person who joins the military, you've got 20 years on your side to let time be a compounding factor. And so, I advocate early adoption of the personal rules to finance, whereas business needs to happen a little bit faster potentially. At times you might be using and leveraging other people's capital, which sort of maybe sets a little bit of a different set of rules as it pertains to governance, responsibility, reporting, and discipline, and how you're sort of putting that money or putting that capital to use. So I guess, time, the need for rules is there, but the rules will be a little bit different, or you're governing right and left of arcs. Rules might be a bit of a stretch, but having some right and left of arcs to guide you, and keep you from heading into some no-go areas.
So let's talk about that. Let's jump into those left and right lateral limits as far as personal finance, because I've seen it be a lot of veterans have a lot of problems moving up professionally when they're not financially stable on the back end. What are those rules for you?
So first and foremost, and these are not my rules, I've probably read them in a million different books or seen examples, but what I have found works very well for me is pay yourself first, and establish enough of a nest egg that you sort of park in a basket that you don't touch, and then allow that basket to start using time to your advantage and take advantage of the power of compound interest. And that, I think that's kind of the holy grail. If you have time on your side, and I would say, everyone in our generation, whether you're starting at 20 or 40, you still have time on your side. So leveraging that time and that little bit of capital is probably the secret to personal success. And in a lot of ways, it's a little bit like a diet when you're trying to lose weight. You want to burn more calories than you consume. This is a little bit of the inverse. Find the number from a savings perspective that still allows you and affords you to live the lifestyle you want, but take that little bit and pay yourself first. That sort of supersedes maybe at times even paying a little bit of debt or paying off a credit card. We're very quick to pay everyone else. We're very quick to pay all of our bills. Sometimes we forget to pay ourselves. And so that I think is probably the most important rule. And then once you have a little bit of a bucket established, put it to work in a long-term interest generating sort of field of compound interest.
Gotcha. So if somebody comes to you then, Glenn, and maybe they're like me, and maybe they were spending money like it was on fire, and they're like, I burned the ship, Glenn. I need to get back on track. I have no idea what I'm doing. What would be that first stepping stone as far as the nest egg in the bucket?
For sure. So, I guess from a disclaimer, I'm not a personal finance advisor. So, for you or your listeners, anything I'm saying, please don't take it as financial advice. Please consult a professional, your professional financial planner or investment advisor. But if I understand your question, if you've kind of looking to get yourself back on track, one of my favorite quotes is, if you find yourself in a hole, the first thing you do is stop digging. So, whatever sort of area from a capital perspective that you're hemorrhaging, try to plug that hole. Apply some battlefield tactical combat casualty care, stop the bleed, win the firefight first, then stop the bleed to buy yourself some time to get back to a facility where you can care for your wounds. So find what is hemorrhaging and stop the bleed. Maybe it's credit card debt. Maybe it's just a lifestyle of spending. Maybe it's car payments on a car that you don't really need, or a lifestyle that doesn't really contribute to your overall happiness and quality of life, because money does not equal quality of life. So find where that is, and maybe look at putting some checks and balances in place to sort of stop that hemorrhaging. And there's a lot of great tools that automate a lot of that for you nowadays. So it's not very difficult to kind of figure out how to do it. And there's a load of resources out there to kind of help build a strategy on a lot of these tools without having to hire someone to do it for you, or incur an additional expense with another advisor or someone who's going to just take fees and take more money from you.
Yeah. So if somebody's saying, okay, Glenn, you're not a financial advisor, but I definitely need to get this back on track, and you talked about those tools. What tools and resources would you recommend immediately?
Understanding financial literacy, which again is probably a BS answer to your question, because it takes a little bit of discipline to sit down and start. And you need to know when you get onto the internet, what's the first thing you're typing in. Mm-hmm. If you're anything like me, rather than gravitating towards a garbage site that's just mind numbing, you want to go and start looking at, towards, the topic that you're kind of looking for. So I would suggest you start with your bank. Banks generally have some fairly good resources in terms of, different models, different types of account setups, where, you can start to look at, am I maximizing my financial setup appropriately? In Canada, we have what's called a TFSA, a tax-free savings account, and an RRSP, a registered retirement savings plan. It's a little bit like your Roth 401k or your 401ks. But, most people I know who don't have a lot of financial literacy aren't taking advantage of some of those types of tools. And they're generally free to set up, maybe a nominal account. And that's a great spot to start putting some of the money that you would have if you start paying yourself first. So rather than putting it into a checking account where you're tempted to spend it, you can start parking it in some of these registered accounts where you're going to start receiving a lot of tax benefits and tax savings. And I think that's kind of the easiest. And most banks will have some sort of an investment advisor that can help you get set up and won't really charge you. They'll want you to onboard as a client, but you don't have to feel obligated to onboard as a client, and they will kind of help you get that set up. The other thing that I really advised guys that I was working with when I was in the military to look at, which is more time intensive, and there was a fee to it. But it was the Canadian Securities course. So this was a sort of a 1-year course, learn at your own pace, done through the Canadian Securities Institute, which I equated as kind of like your basic training of the financial world. And this course was sort of the first, if you ever wanted to work in the financial industry, this was kind of like, basic training. And you needed this course as that sort of foundational building block to start, gaining other qualifications for compliance purposes. But it was it was the wave tops of finance and economics. And it's delivered in such a way that you don't need to be a math brain. You don't need to be a financial expert, and you'll start to sort of understand macro and microeconomics. You'll understand different securities and the characteristics that different securities have. So again, going back to the military, we can use military analogies for all of these things. But if I'm being engaged with effective fire, from 700 or 800 meters or yards, my assault rifle is probably not going to work. I'm going to need a belt-fed machine gun or a heavy caliber machine gun to reach out and actually affect. And financial instruments are like that as well. They all have different characteristics. And to utilize them effectively, you want to use them within the effective ranges or the effective characteristics of what those tools are. And so, and a lot of guys sort of, did that course. When I was in my squadron as a squadron commander, I even sort of allocated budget from my O&M, my operational budget for guys to professionally develop along those lines. And I was very encouraging for guys to do this course because it would help them understand the characteristics of these different sort of financial tools. I don't know what it would be in the US. I don't know what the equivalent is, but I'm sure a quick internet search on sort of, securities qualifications and understanding of financial instruments will help. There has to be a desire to do that.
Right.
There has to be a desire to sort of understand your sort of financial, goals and start setting some goals.
So you obviously play in this world a lot, and we've talked about a lot of good advice that's out there. What bad advice do you see that's sinking ships?
Well, it's sunk my own ship a couple. Invest in what you know, and stay in the lane that you're comfortable in. I'll give you a macro example: a Bitcoin. I don't have a clue about Bitcoin. I think that there's, some form of new currency or store of wealth or store of value that will challenge gold. It may be Bitcoin or Ethereum or one of these other products. I don't understand the market. I don't understand, the sort of the underlying blockchains that use it. And if you can't explain, I have two girls, a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old. If I can't explain why I'm doing something to my 9-year-old or my 6-year-old, then I don't do it. We saw something similar in Canada. In 2017, we federally legalized cannabis. And we hit a massive explosion we hit a cannabis bubble, and people made a ton of money in the cannabis space. And then the bubble burst, a lot like the tech bubble in kind of 01 or 2000, whenever that was. And a lot of money went into the field, and people didn't have a clue about cannabis. People didn't have a clue about, if you're a retail investor, sort of like an average investor that's finding these deals on sort of up and coming spaces, if you're buying in at the time you hear about it, you've already missed the opportunity to make money, because every other institutional investor has already raped that deal. And that's what's kind of left on the table and gone out sort of an access to retail investors. So I would suggest, investing in what you know. And I've got a great sort of anecdote about trying to build a vehicle for serving military people and veterans. And we didn't have a lot of success with it. But I was involved in a fund. I was still serving at the time. I was still in the military, and I was asked to participate and buy into a fund that was building sort of a mutual fund of companies that were relevant to the defense space, and in particular, the defense space in Canada. So, this idea was that we were going to build a basket of funds and then market that basket to serving military members or veterans, with a view of being able to push the prospectus, the fund information, and the companies that we were investing in, so that they could associate and understand where and how they were, buying a specific fund. This wasn't in the fund, but if you're in the Air Force and you're a mechanic or an aerospace engineer supporting an F-35, turning a wrench on a flight line somewhere, maybe investing in Lockheed Martin is a good move, because you can touch it, you can see it, you can feel it. When the stock does something, you can understand what's happening in that space, as opposed to being, listening to your neighbor saying, "Hey, buy Bitcoin, it's awesome," and you don't have a clue of what it is. And there's a lot of great sort of technologies out there, and the military, the intelligence community is such early adopters of these technologies that
Right.
a lot of the serving folks or veterans will intuitively understand the technology because they used it every day as part of their military or national service to their country. And so it's more tangible. They could turn around and probably explain it to their kid. And so far as they'll understand it as well, and they'll be a lot more comfortable in making that decision and riding it sort of for the long game. Because if you go back to the compound interest in time, I mean, time is this secret weapon. As an investor, it's it's not about timing the market; it's about time in the market, and the ability to kind of weather the storms of up and down, and different economic cycles, and where companies or opportunities are in their business cycle or their growth cycle. It's just noise. The day to day is noise. It's the long term trends, and not the if you're looking at a stock chart as an example, it's the yearly trend of a nice rolling wave, and not the noise of the day-to-day up and down.
So you mentioned your daughters in this, and we're going to switch gears just a little bit if we could. So you've obviously gone through this entire process while raising two daughters. When you're talking to them about what you're doing and what's coming next, because you are in a high-risk industry, right?
Yep.
At any moment, the entrepreneurial life can implode around you. How do you discuss this with your daughters and your family and get everybody on board?
So I came from a very entrepreneurial family. My old man was an entrepreneur. My grandfather was same family business, and my great grandfather, same family business. And when I was a kid, my old man used to bring us out to business meetings. We would have family meetings about the business because he was a big advocate of family enterprise and family business. And I can remember being like bored to death. I was probably 8 or 10.
Mm-hmm.
And, my mom's taking minutes as the corporate secretary, and my old man's kind of walking us through sort of what's happening. And, I didn't appreciate how important that was at the time. But what it did was twofold. One, it taught financial literacy at a very early age. And if I was ever in government, which I never would be, I would push really hard to try to amend school curriculums to include more financial courses in school, because it's never taught, and it's a wasted opportunity to really empower kids with a bit more financial knowledge. And I do the same with my girls. I'm talking to you from my office. I have a home office, but my office is about 900 yards from my house. I walk my kids to school when I can. I come to work. They have their own office in my office. They have a whiteboard. They come down and hang out with me while I'm working. I try to involve them as much as I can in what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, the types of opportunities that I'm getting involved in. My respirator company that I bought, we just did a big deal with the UFC. So we've done a global multi-year global partnership with Dana White and the UFC. And I watch every UFC with my kids now. So now my 6-year-old is like, in the latest fight, Khabib was wearing our product. Khabib was repping our product. We've got Dustin Poirier doing the same when he fights Conor on the 23rd of January. So like, I've already got my girls involved in something a little less business-like. And so they're tracking it when they see, the advertisements for the company in the octagon. They're like, hey, there it is. And, I try to get them excited about some of the businesses that we're getting involved in. And I am ruthlessly honest with them. I joke with my oldest. She's a really good hockey player. And, I joke that our goals, I keep saying to her, and this is a stretch, so don't hold me to it, but I keep joking. I say, you know what? We're going to buy an NHL team. I'm going to buy an NHL team, and you're going to be my GM. And so I'm just kind of trying to use some of those examples to foster, a lot of fun business discussions about sort of some, future hypotheticals, which, I don't think I'd ever buy an NHL team, but it would be hilarious if we did. But yeah, I just try to involve business discussions in ways that make it fun for them. And I'm very honest with them. If I'm feeling stressed about business, if there's a deal, I'll tell them. I say, you know what, there's a lot of responsibility when we're talking about some of these decisions that have to be made. And, I'll talk about, I have very open discussions with them about capital and money, and how in some regards, it's one of those taboo subjects that you never really want to talk about. But in other regards, it's a very important conversation to have. And I'm very comfortable talking about money. And I try to weigh, the pros and cons of what a 9-year-old going to school and talking about, oh, my dad just did a $5 million deal, or something, because it's not my capital. It's limited partner capital. It's investor capital. They don't know the nuances of that. So I'm very cognizant about how it's perceived. But I do try to involve them as much as I can where I think it's sort of responsible, and I try to make it fun.
And you mentioned that it is a taboo subject, and a lot of people, particularly parents, don't want to worry their children. But what have you seen with your daughters? How have they responded to that conversation when you're having it?
It's done with a way that I make my daughters kind of come up with their own financial plans. If they want to buy something, we try to teach them the value of a dollar, and try to teach them what does that dollar equate to in terms of time or opportunity cost, and still let them be kids and have fun and go and buy, whatever LOL doll or whatever they see and they just want to buy it. But we also, my wife and I, we try to instill sort of the sense in opportunity cost. If you buy that crappy toy that you want on an impulse, then you don't have that money to do something else later. And we sort of try not to say, without spoiling or feeling like spending like at will, we try to put the decision onto them at an early enough age, and not shame them into not spending, but try to make them aware of the implications to their decision. And you can't have both. And so once they don't really understand the concept of money as a store of wealth. It's just the ticket that you exchange for the thing.
Yeah.
But once you exchange it, you can't unexchange it unless you start, bartering what you bought with. So, which they're not going to do. So really try to give them choice. Right. Try and walk them rationally through some of those choices. And then as it pertains to, larger, running a household or family budgets, or, what's involved with, more real sort of capital expenses. We don't get into too much detail about that, but just let them know that we're doing the same thing that we're asking them to do. So a little bit of kind of lead by example. I've started my girls their own bank accounts. So they each have their own bank account. They know how to access it. There's not much in it, but they get excited about it. It's kind of expressing a little bit of interest to learn. We will probably start entering into sort of stock market discussions when they're a little bit older. I mean, I got introduced to the stock market from my grandfather, who was, probably the best value investor I've ever met. And, love him to death. He was kind of a terrible grandfather in the sense that, like, we never went fishing, but I could sit down and he'd read a stock chart to me and, make me sort of, understand price to earnings ratios, which I thought was terrible at the time, but it was, pretty good now.
So, and Glenn, I know you're a busy man and we're running out of time, but if you could go back and you had a magic wand and could implant a message into the brain of every veteran who's getting out, what would that message be?
you don't have to have all the answers as soon as you get out. And it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to feel like you're going down a path that's not right for you. You're not alone in any of the hardship or struggle or, loneliness or, any of the emotions that come with transition. It's a big deal. And we're all in it together. And when you couple any injuries, whether they're physical or mental, any addiction issues, these just layer on to some of the stressors that come with an already stressful phase of life. So I think there's a lot of great sort of veteran groups, community groups. Find your little community, because that's often what we miss when we transition, is that sense of community. And so, but don't be in a rush. There's an incredible opportunity out there. And, I think if I could have done anything different for myself, notwithstanding a need to have a paycheck, I would have taken time. I would have taken 6 months and done nothing other than heal a little bit, grieve a little bit, enjoy my family, and allow myself the time to just kind of like breathe before I felt like I needed to jump into the next thing with 2 feet. So if paychecks, they obviously for most people are a requirement, maybe dabble in a little bit of part-time stuff, maybe take on a few projects that are not really don't require a lot of commitment, but something you could do while you're still kind of figuring out the next bound, and there's no rush to figure it out.
Awesome. Glenn, thank you so much for joining us, brother. I appreciate it.
Carson, it's been great to meet you and great to get to know you. Hopefully I wasn't too long-winded, and I hope some of your audience might have taken a few things out of this.
Oh, I'm sure they will. Thanks for coming, Glenn. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening to another episode of the Spotlight Podcast. And I just wanted to take a second to ask you who you think should be interviewed on the show. Who do you think is out there that's just absolutely crushing it that the veteran population needs to hear from? That's what we want to hear from you. Send us your suggestions to spotlight@thezenveteran.com. That's SPOTLIGHT @thezenveteran.com. Thanks again for listening.